Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining this off-cycle talk sponsored by the Center for Archival Futures at the University of Maryland. My name is Mason Jones. I am a PhD candidate in information studies here at UMD. Before we get started, I wanted to give a brief intro to the Center for Archival Futures and also give our land acknowledgement before introducing the speakers and moving into the panel event proper. We have the chat function available throughout the event if you want to ask questions or clarifications. And at the end, we will take questions from the registration as well as from the chat and the raise hand function. So I'll get started. So the Center for Archival Futures is a relatively new center in the iSchool, which began in January of 2021. We are a group of interdisciplinary researchers from within UMD's iSchool and beyond, whose work intersects at archives and digital curation, broadly conceived. We are interested in systems, processes, institutions that care for and enable the use of digital objects and digital and data over time. Various projects that fall under CAFE's umbrella take a wide range of human-centered approaches to understanding topics, including data in communities, knowledge ecosystems, and the life cycle of data. This is an off-cycle panel event. We regularly host a monthly talk that highlights some of the many interesting research and projects that are occurring in archives and digital curation, again, broadly conceived. You can find recordings of our previous guest speakers on the Cafe event page link, which has just been pasted in the chat. And before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that the land I live and work on is the ancestral homeland of the Nacotchtank, Piscataway, and their relatives. Today, the Center for Archival Futures and the iSchool at the University of Maryland are hosting this event from College Park, Maryland, which is located on the ancestral territories of the Piscataway and Nacotchtank and their indigenous kin and neighbors. As members of the University of Maryland, a land-grant university, we acknowledge the 202,000 acres of stolen indigenous land taken and distributed to the university under the Morrill Act in 1862. We want to acknowledge the separation that these and many other acts of colonialism, assimilation, and genocide have generated between indigenous people and their homelands. We further acknowledge the continued power and resilience of indigenous communities and nations and celebrate the collaborative and decolonizing work taking place within scholarly work within and without of our respective fields. So from there, I would like to see have our panelists introduce themselves.
Hi, my name is Lisa Warwick. I work at DC Public Library, and I'm the manager of the People's Archive at DC Public Library.
Hi, everyone. My name is Lauren Mixon. I'm the Outreach and Academic Engagement Librarian at Coastal Carolina University, which is in South Carolina. I'm excited to be talking with all of y'all.
Am I next? I couldn't remember. Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm Britt Starr. I recently graduated from the University of Maryland's English department. I specialized in feminist rhetoric, digital studies, and gender studies, and social change studies. And I've used zines in a variety of capacities. I started a zine club through the Book Lab, which is a makerspace and letterpress printing studio and library and kind of like gathering space housed in the English department. I've also taught zines, and I'm sure we'll talk more about details. And I have invited zine makers to come to the campus to host workshops. So I'm excited to be here.
Hello, everyone. My name is Sharia Omeda. I'm a librarian at Allen Hancock College in Santa Maria, California. Also a zine maker and avid enthusiast for the whole entire zine community. Super happy to be here today.
It's great to have all of you here joining us. I know that our audience and myself are all excited to be learning from you and hearing about your work. Before we begin the panel questions, I'm going to turn it over to Lauren, who wants to share a zine making process that folks can use for a variety of things during this event or beyond. So I'll turn it over to you, Lauren, if that's okay.
Thank you. All right. Well, so first I'd like to invite everybody to prepare their space and get their materials. We're going to make a miniature zine that only requires a single sheet of computer paper. You're going to need a pair of scissors and the sheet of paper, and you'll be set. Before we get started in making the zine itself, I want to talk a little bit about the perspective with which I am approaching this today, and I tend to approach this. I, being an academic librarian, approach zines as a pedagogy tool, specifically as part of open pedagogy, which is a concept that really centers the fact that creation of information or knowledge or whatever is a part of and cannot be separated from learning, right? So open pedagogy, it encourages people to be active creators of knowledge as they're learning knowledge. And so I have used zines and have proposed using zines in this way as something that you can create a blank zine at the beginning of a learning experience. I've used this in like conference kind of settings before, to then compile all the information from different sources that you're learning, and create some sort of document, some sort of new piece of information from all the various people you talk to and the experiences you have. And so I'm going to encourage everybody, maybe use it today to take their notes for this event, or you can hold on to it and use it for something else. But I have a video for us of me folding it because I figured that would be the easiest way to go about this. So I'm going to share my screen. All right. So everybody should be seeing my screen here. I'm going to make it, I'm going to make it bigger so everybody can, it'll take the whole screen. All right, so I'll narrate it as we go. You should have the sheet of paper laying kind of horizontal on your desk like that. And the first thing you're gonna do is a hamburger fold, right? You're gonna fold over the shorter sides to meet each other. All right, and this is on a loop, so it'll go to the next thing. So you'll open it up, and you know, have a center fold in your paper. And the next thing we're going to do is what I describe as like a pamphlet kind of fold, right? You're going to fold each individual side into that center crease. All right. I try to slow this down so hopefully everybody can follow along. All right, so you should have done that to both sides. Now you'll unfold it again all the way. And now we're going to do a hot dog fold, right? So you're going to fold it the other direction. There you go. Just kind of bring it together. It can be kind of finicky here because you've got other folds going on, but just do your best. Use your fingers to kind of flatten it out. All right. Once you do that, you're going to open it up to a flat sheet of paper again. And now what we're going to do is we're going to try and do that hamburger fold again. Go back to that original hamburger fold. And so you'll have it kind of divided up into your fold. Oh no. Did it kick me off or what happened?
It only kicked your video off
Oh
and then it
no. Okay.
muted you.
Oh no. All right.
You're
Let's
back.
try it one more time. I'm so sorry, everyone. And I couldn't see, I had the chat open, but I didn't have anything else open. I'm so sorry. Does anyone want to tell me where we left off? And I can get us back there. Okay, we're at maybe, oh, okay. So we're at the part where I paused. Okay, we're good. I apologize. Okay, let's try again. All right. Does everybody see my screen? All right.
Yes.
Okay, cool. Thank you. I do have the chat open if something else happens. So we're at our fold where we have our 4 sections. This is where our scissors are going to come in. So I'll take a second, make sure everybody has their scissors. And we're just going to make a singular cut. It's along the folded side, right? Right here. You're going to just cut along where you folded, only to the center point. So you'll see right there, it's just to the center point. And you should be able to open it up and you're just going to have a kind of hole in the center there.
We lost your video again.
I'm so sorry. Well, then we're going to go without the video and I'll tell you the final bit. It is
I can demo for you.
we'll figure it out from here. So you should have, and I have a blank one because we're completely done. Now it's just getting it into place, right? So we have the cut in the center. Oh, let me take my background off. I am so sorry, y'all. Let's see. I'm just trying to figure out how to tape. There we go. No background. Now you see my messy desk. All right. So we have the hole in the center here. What you're going to do is you're going to fold it over. So we're at hot dog fold again. Right with me? And you're essentially going to push all of the bits together to the center. And now you just kind of squeeze into a little mini zine, right? I'll do that motion one more time in case anyone missed it. So we have our hot dog, we moosh to the center, and then I just am grabbing one side and grabbing one side and mushing them together. All right. I'm sorry that the video didn't continue, otherwise I'd let it loop one more time for you. But this is probably one of the most common, easy, simple, tiny mini zines that anybody can create with a singular sheet of paper. I keep blank ones of these around me all the time for note taking, because sometimes I get on a kick of I just want to fold a bunch, and they're all just kind of sitting with me to take to meetings or take to things. And so I highly encourage, as we talk today, that we kind of embrace the zine creation, and maybe take some notes or doodles while you listen today on the zine. Apologies again for the video.
All right. Thank you for sharing that with us, Lauren. Really appreciate that. That's going to be useful for taking notes and doodling or what have you as we go through. All right, so I think we're ready to move on to the broader panel discussion if everybody is prepared for that. So to start, I just want to ask, can you tell us a little bit about your work with zines or with like DIY print culture, anything in that realm, and we can start with whoever wants to go first.
I'll go first if everybody's okay with that. I feel like everybody's introduction was so good. It's setting up where you guys are in the zine world. And I feel like I was just like, I'm the manager of an archive. But part of the People's Archive is what we call the DC Punk Archive. So our overall mission at the People's Archive is to collect on hyperlocal DC history and culture. We also want to make sure that people understand that history is not in the past, that it's still happening today. So we want to keep, especially kind of at people's forefront of their minds, that the DC punk culture and cultures like DC go-go culture are still very much alive today. We don't, when we're asking for donations and collections, we don't want people to feel like this is a thing from the past and we're just going to put it downstairs. We want it to be something that is used and informs now in the city. So we do collect a lot of zines. We have 7 collections that have zines as a part of those collections. And we also have 2 unprocessed collections where the zines are all ready to go. So sometimes if people ask for certain zines, we'll be able to pull from those collections. And we have 150 zines up online in our repository called digitize. So we just see zines kind of on this continuum of periodicals that we also collect. We just see them as a very low barrier form of publishing, basically. So we also have a lot of self-published periodicals, and we see them as just very kind of concisely showing what the culture and the people living through DC culture kind of were thinking, what was popular. And we also see them really as a continuum with those other periodicals. So that's our kind of viewpoint about zines and how I landed in the zine world, kind of backwards through my work as an archivist. Does that answer the question, Mason? Okay.
Yes, I think so.
Yeah.
Shreya, would you like to?
Yeah, I'll go. So again, my name is Shareya. I have been making zines for about a year. So in the zine world, I'm still a little baby. I really have enjoyed zine culture. That's been one of the biggest draws and one of the things I've enjoyed most so far. Since I started making zines, I went to my first zine festival at the LA Zine Fest this year, which was really, really incredible, so inspiring to see all of the different things that people were creating and start to make some connections. Earlier this year, I was invited to give a presentation at my local mental health nonprofit. So that was an incredible opportunity to share a zine that I had made about my own experiences. And then also to lead a workshop similar to what we just did to teach people how to make a zine and then use that zine to reflect on the presentation that I gave as a way to take away something that they enjoyed from the presentation or something they could relate to, which was really, really an amazing experience. I'm actually working on starting a zine collection at my community college. So that's really, really exciting. It's a huge endeavor, but one that I'm really excited to be a part of. And I will also be leading 4 zine workshops for students this coming spring semester. So just all kinds of different avenues of working with the zine community and bringing zines to as many different folks and populations as I can.
Thank you so much. Lauren?
I told you a little bit about my kind of perspective on it to start with, but I'm in a university setting. I work with, there is on campus as a response to restrictive requirements on student publications on campus. There was a zine that was developed on campus through the Women and Gender Studies department that I've worked with a little bit, talking about the history of zine and DIY print culture. And I've been trying to incorporate it as much as possible into all of my instruction and things like that. I'm looking to do some more training on arts books and bookmaking in the upcoming year. So so I come from it from more of a personal love that I keep just trying to incorporate into all of my workspaces, whether they're ready for it or not.
That leaves me. So as I mentioned, I have used zines a lot in teaching context. So while I was getting my PhD in the English department, I was teaching various courses. And once I discovered zines, I'm also a relative newbie. I think I discovered them maybe 4 years ago, as a medium, as a form of expression and communication and counterculture. I think that's what really drew me into zines. Is, you know, I study feminist rhetoric and youth activism and activism online and just like print culture, both, you know, print and online. And so when I found, but I'm like more contemporary oriented, and so when I found zines, I think it was through like the kind of feminist punk moment in zine culture. I should say my dissertation is on girls' anger and women's anger. And so I was like, oh my gosh, this is the coolest medium for girls to have been able to express anger before there was social media. And so that's a little bit of how I came to it. And then I have found that it's an amazing teaching tool, as some of you have already talked about. I think my most successful like use of zines in the classroom was as a like unit capstone project. The unit was on information media, design, and social consequences. And so this course was about writing in the wireless world and looking at different forms of communication and how the design of those forms affects the way that they're used in society. And so I assigned a zine as the kind of capstone project for that unit, where the instructions were very open, and it was just like, make a zine that synthesizes something that resonated with you from this unit. And so I'm always, as an instructor, especially of English and like academic writing, I'm always trying to find genres or forms of assignments that allow students to be creative and critical, right? And like feel less hindered by the form of the assignment, and get to take risks and like think, you know, synthesize the material in a way that makes sense to them. The other thing I love about teaching the zine for this was that, you know, I assigned a lot of like college level readings, and we talked, and this was an information media unit. And so we talked about paywalls and, you know, like trouble accessing academic articles. And so this was like, translate some of your knowledge from this unit to a popular audience that you might share this zine with. And in your, when you turn it in, say like where you would distribute this zine. So I can talk more, but that's some of how I have worked with zines.
Right. And I'm happy for there to be crosstalk between the panelists if y'all have thoughts going forward. But if not, I can move on to the next question.
I was gonna say just I think everybody saw my jaw drop at your PhD topic. That's so cool, Britt. But one of the things that's kind of come up in us documenting DC punk culture, and I think punk culture in general, is that a lot of the zines, like you said, were women-led, women-created, and also I was reading one of them and I can't remember the title, but it was such like a beautiful teenage expression of realizing like, I'm a woman in the world and that means these really shitty things that like, and just having a vehicle, it was like, if you are a man who doesn't know what I'm going through, I'm just gonna start handing you this zine basically and being like, this is what it means. Like, here's why I'm mad. I'm mad because I'm having to explain these things over and over again. And just seeing zines as a vehicle for that, I think is really touching. And I'm sure for a lot of us here, we had like those moments of like, I thought I was the only one who thought that, and seeing that really personal kind of diary-like language on a piece of paper that people are handing out is really touching, I think.
I just kind of,
oh yeah, go ahead.
no, go ahead. I was just going to build on what you all were saying about using those zines to make personal connections and how that can be so powerful. I work with specifically the women in gender studies, and we have a really robust sustainability program at our college. I work with the capstone students, and I use zines and the personal like community knowledge that is often coming from zines to talk about like information and power, and to talk about how, you know, it might be lovely to read, you know, somebody with 20 years of experience and a doctorate in a field, but getting someone's actual lived experience is actually in many cases more valuable than a peer-reviewed article. I get pushback on that sometimes working in academia. But the zines are a way to open up that conversation about information and power. And I think that's like incredibly important.
I agree. I like to say that zines are the ultimate primary resource. In the library, we're always talking about primary and secondary. And so I was like, no, this is so important. And here's why. This is a person with lived experience going through that point in time, really like being able to break down, you know, how they're being perceived or what they're encountering. And that's just something that is empowering to the maker, and also giving them a voice and a platform to share with others, connect with others, and also educate others. So yeah, just one of the many, many reasons why zines are so incredibly powerful.
Yeah, I love that. That makes me think of actually something I was going to say in response to what Lisa had said is just as a medium, they uniquely afford this ability for the creator to express emotion and storytelling. Like they can be multimodal, and they're just so like freeing, not limiting, right? Like anything, you can kind of be a zine, you can do whatever you want with them. You can be doodles, it could be comic, it could be collage, it could be abstract, it could be a story, right? And now I'm forgetting what I was gonna say, but I think, yeah, just that like they allow a kind of authentic expression that includes like emotion and, you know, analysis and description and whatever, which is why I love it for teaching, you know, kind of theoretical and like complex topics that have very real impact in the world. And so students can actually respond personally and emotionally and demonstrate and like share knowledge through that medium. So, yeah.
I was gonna do another shameless plug of yeah, there's so many things coming up, but one of the programs we did last year was a panel with all Black zinesters. So Osa Ato, who did Shotgun Seamstress, kind of brought this group of people together, and exactly like I think Lauren said, talking about like this lived experience as more valuable than reading like a PhD student, and how that really affects people. The other thing I was going to say is for us also the connection as a librarian and seeing different kinds of formats is seeing how some zines have become like what you would think of as like glossy periodicals, like the Washington Blade, which is like the big gay periodical in DC, started out as a one-page newsletter that was like typed out on a typewriter. Like it could have been a zine, and it's turned into this, you know, ongoing decades-long publication. Yeah, so those are some things that came to mind.
So all great thoughts. Thank you so much for sharing that. Can move on to the next question. So how did you become interested in working with zines, either in a personal or professional capacity, or likely both from the sounds of it for many of you? And what do you hope your future work looks like?
I can start. I think I wasn't really aware too much of like zine culture until I started my MLIS, which I went to Simmons University, which has a pretty robust zine collection, and I was just browsing it and like learning about it from that. I will say that after finding out more about zine culture, I like reflected on my life, and I definitely had been making zines like with my friends as kids, like sharing back and forth like stories we created or things like that in that way. But I went on a deep rabbit hole after just being exposed to a zine collection in a library. And so that there should be more of those. I'm hopeful that for my work that I can continue to push zines as a medium, as a teaching tool, as open pedagogy in spaces where that is not already like acceptable, right? It's a lot easier to push it in women and gender studies than it would be in I don't know, the other liaison areas I might have. And so I think that's a big part of it for me. I also am working on bringing more like book arts generally to what I'm working on. Right now we don't have a collection of any sort for zines or art books or anything like that. And we are getting a lot of pushback on, I mean, in the state in general, on a lot of marginalized stories and things like that. And so right now it might be a little hard to prioritize collecting, queer, feminist, personal experiences via zines. Yeah, that's kind of where I am right now.
I can jump in. I can't really, I was trying to remember before this webinar, like what is my origin story with zines? I know it was while working in book lab. I can't remember exactly like how the first zine I saw or how I discovered them, but I just know it was through like feminist punk zines and just my general obsession with women's anger and different outlets for it. And yeah, as a means of publishing counterculture, counter knowledge. But in going forward, and I think this conversation is bringing this back to the surface of my mind because I haven't been thinking about this very much very recently, but for my dissertation, I studied how youth activists are using social media to liberate women's anger. And I think I would love to make do a more historical project about women's anger and forms of media that have enabled women to express anger. And I should say gender diverse folks, because it's not actually just women that I look at in the end, although that's where I started. But yeah, so I would like to make a connection between zines and social media. That's like a relationship that I've been interested in for a while, but haven't actually sat down and like written about it. But that's something I would like to look into more. And then also just continuing to use zines in my teaching. They're just such an accessible medium and a great way to, as Lauren said, really get students to think about information and access and knowledge production and authority. And so, yeah, I want to just keep bringing it in to all areas of my life.
That's great. Sharia?
I like to joke that I was zine adjacent for a really long time. I was involved in the punk rock scene in San Antonio, Texas, and then also in San Pedro in the early 2000s. So I had known what zines were for a really long time and had seen them and passed them along and even collected a couple for myself, but hadn't actually kind of dipped my toe into the culture until fairly recently. And I think one of the things that really helped me begin to start making those connections was I discovered xerography debt, and then another zine of zine reviews called Node Pajamo. And I basically just wrote to every single person in each of those zine reviews and was like, hey, this is my name. How long have you been making zines? Let's trade. I'm so curious to see what yours looks like. And really just kind of spread out all of these different like feelers. And yeah, started getting involved that way. It's been such an amazing experience so far. Every single person I've met has been so warm and welcoming. I think that's the beauty of subcultures, right? Is that you meet a group of people that are passionate about the same things that you are, and everybody is just really there to support and lift you up and connect you with other people that they know your interests align with. So that's just been an absolute joy to discover. As far as what I would like to do specifically at the college where I work, I mentioned starting a zine collection. I think that that would be an incredible gift to the students here on this campus. We have a pretty diverse community here, and one thing that I think would be incredible is if we could make the collection something where the students could come in and see themselves reflected. And even have the opportunity to contribute their own lived experiences and their own narratives to the collection too. Just being able to create a space in a collection that allows them to feel seen and understood and recognized, I think is such an incredible opportunity. And it's something that I'm really, really dedicated to getting up and running in such a way so that we can start to build that community, both with students to students, and then to the college and to the community as a whole.
I think on the last one, I think that the thing I would like to see at the library going forward is just more of that connection of zines in a variety of formats. So most of our zines connect to DC punk subcultures, but seeing zines or newsletters kind of in a different light, like seeing that there are other communities creating zines that might not call them zines or that might not identify as DC punks, and that if they're a part of DC culture, they still belong in our collections. Another thing that I really love about zines and kind of what got me really interested in zines is just their connection to the physical world. I think as an archivist and librarian, a lot of archivists and librarians kind of come to it from that angle of like just loving the feeling of holding something, and kind of the magic of zines and books to kind of appear in your life at certain points of time. Oh, thank you. Before I moved to DC, I lived in Pittsburgh and I grew up in Maryland, and I saw a zine in a friend's house that was like basically like DC punk gossip, and read it and then moved to DC and met the people years later. Like it's so weird and like magical to kind of just get those really personal stories in a way that you wouldn't get otherwise. Like I think those, I mean, maybe that's the internet for the youths now, but you know, that's going to be erased someday, or they can everybody's erased their live journals by now, but our zines are still floating around somewhere.
I don't think this is a question, but I just want to throw this out there in case we want to talk about this at some point, is that difference between zines and like online life, whether we're talking about digitized zines or social media or any other kind of text that lives online that might serve a similar kind of purpose, because I do think there are important differences. I saw Sharia nodding as well, so we could come back to that.
All right, I think we can move on to the next question if everyone's okay with that. So far in the various capacities of your work, what are some of the benefits of working with zines in your job or your personal life? And on the flip side of that, what are some of the challenges from your work with zines or print culture in general? Shreya, would you want to take it?
Sure, yeah.
Thank you.
So benefits, I think we've kind of talked about it a little bit. To me, I think the biggest benefit is giving voice to those experiences and narratives that are not often acknowledged by mainstream media or large publication houses. So really being able to honor those experiences, how unique and different each and every one of them are, I think is pretty incredible. I feel like I learn something new every time I read a different zine. I've discovered so many different other like albums and artists and video games and all kinds of different things that I would have never discovered, even on the internet. I have no idea how I would have even started those searches. So that's just been a real joy to have this continuous kind of learning journey. And that's also one of the reasons why I would love for students to experience it too. It's just a completely different way to begin kind of like the research process, which I think is really, really fun and engaging. I also really enjoy just the artistry of the zines as objects themselves. They're all so different too. Some are colorful, graphics, illustrations, collage, they all are so varied. So that's another element that I really enjoy about zines and zine making. I think for me, one of the challenges, particularly when it comes to starting a collection, is not having a point of contact for the person who's made the zine, or if that point of contact is no longer available or has expired, the person moved from that address. It can be really hard because then you can't even start the conversation. You can't reach out and say, get any history about where they were at this time, or if I have any follow-up questions. And you also can't ask permission to use their zine or potentially digitize their zine. So that's been a little bit challenging to trying to figure out, how do I use this object in an ethical way, making sure that I'm honoring the person who created it and using it within the context that they originally made it.
Yeah, that came up with our digital collection, and I think we've had one person contact us in the DC Punk online collection and asked to take a flyer down. We actually haven't had anybody ask to take zines down, but we did kind of look for zines that we thought would not be offensive to appear online. There were some zines that kind of like had call outs, and it was before the internet existed. So we went with the assumption of like, the internet is not something that people thought of. They might not want to have this on the internet available to everybody on the world and keyword searchable. Yeah, and when it comes to zines, so many of them are basically original cataloging if you want to get really detailed with it. So that is also a challenge.
I would say one of the benefits that I haven't yet talked about is just the joy and fun of zine making in the classroom, and the way that assigning zines and having days in the classroom where I'm teaching them how to do the fold that Lauren taught us, and bringing in magazines for folks to just like look through and rip stuff out of and use their hands. I think related to what Lisa was just mentioning of like, maybe the youth have like, social media now for this. But it's so completely different, the experience of making a zine, in ways that are really invaluable and connect us to the body and are like relaxing. Like when I assigned the zine project in my class, I asked students after they had turned it in, like, how was that for you? And they couldn't wait to talk about how it was fun and relaxing, that like it soothed their anxiety, and I think I know we're living in a context where so many folks are struggling with so much anxiety for very good reasons. And so I think that, and I think the science shows like learning happens best when folks feel calm and safe. And so I think there's that element to the physicality and the creativity and the low barrier to access that I think Lisa used that language of, it's like you can't be like good or bad at it, kind of like there's that element too that I love, that it's all like an amateur form. And so I just have found it to bring joy and ease and calmness into the learning space, which is for me like very, very valuable and kind of hard to achieve. Can be.
I would just echo everything that everyone said about like the benefits of it. I think it's important if you have local stuff in your own collection, you're building community knowledge. The only like negative with being in the space of academia is less of the like using it as an assignment, it more of the using it as a citation in a research paper or something like that, right? The kind of pushback of you know, the academia on non-traditional sources of information. And so that's one thing that like I think I can teach the students as much as I can about power and information and how the value of these things. But a little bit of it comes to getting other professors on board that these are valuable sources of information, and that varies professor to professor.
Right, I think we can move on to the next question then. So what does collecting zines look like at your institution, or what would you like for it to look like? Either now or in the short term or distant future.
I can start. We do not currently have a zine collection at all. We have the one zine that's created by the Women and Gender Studies department that is being like put in the institutional repository because it's born digital. But I am in the midst of an exciting collaboration that I'm hoping will get moving between printmakers in the art department and the digital culture and design department at our university and the library to incorporate artist book making and zine making kind of in conjunction with each other to then create a student created artist book or zine collection within our library that will grow with every iteration of the class or the workshops we run or any of the things that result from it. So like my future goals is that we have not only a collection that people can use, but it's also a collection that people have created. And that's kind of the goal. And then maybe once that gets off its feet, I can convince people to give me money to buy other people's zines. That's kind of where we are with that at my current institution.
I can go. So as I mentioned, I'm just starting our zine collection, very, very early stages. I have been lucky enough to connect with Ziba Perez from the Los Angeles Public Library. Shout out Ziba. And also with Jenna Freeman from Bernard College. I don't know if she's here, but hi if you are. I am so happy to have connected with both of them because they have so much experience with creating zine collections and then also the cataloging piece, which are two things that I have a million questions about. So yeah, starting with those conversations on how to get started. I've collected about 150 zines for our collection so far. I have lots of other kind of feelers out for people, open call to send me their donations. I'm trading with people to get more donations also for my collection. Yeah, and then also just making sure that I'm adhering, like I mentioned early, to the ethical use of zines, making sure that I get permission from the zine makers and figuring out if I could potentially digitize the zines so that they're available for students, not only in the library space, but they're accessible online also.
Oh, Lisa, do you want to go?
You can go first.
Okay. so at the University of Maryland, last I checked, and I graduated this past May, and haven't been on campus for a little while, but when I was looking for zines at the University of Maryland, all I could find was in the women's gender and sexuality studies department. They had this kind of like random secret tucked away room in a random building that was full of zines that folks had made through the women's and gender studies department. I'm not sure exactly what those events were, what those like calls were, but they felt like it was not ethical to put them on display or share them. Like when I was starting a zine collection for the book lab, which we were creating our own library around books related to like print history, book history, they were not even comfortable with me putting a few on display in book lab, which I totally respect and understand the ethics of that, because they had not sought permission to share them when gathering them. But I think this is just like the big challenge of archiving zines is like, exactly as Sharia said, they're not made with the intention often of being a lasting like resource that is going to be available to the public, right? They're sort of like, the culture of zine making is they're ephemera and they are counterculture and maybe like risky and like, find their audience. The audience is like looking for it and the right people like find the zines, right? And so I'm not sure what I would want it to look like at the University of Maryland, but I think that like ideally, I went to the public library in Austin, Texas, which I don't know if any of you know of that collection, but they have an enormous zine collection and it's so amazing. And so I think, if there's a way for the University of Maryland to also have a zine collection as part of the library and have that be done in an ethical way, collected and cataloged in an ethical way, that would be awesome. But it's a little outside of my scope.
Yeah, I also gave a shout out to Austin's public library for their local music collections, which is also very near and dear to my professional heart, I guess. Yeah, so the way we're collecting zines now is people can donate like one-off zines that are kind of DC related or DC authors or some kind of connection to DC. And the really interesting zine collections I think we have are more the like a person who donates a collection and says like, this is my full zine collection, and it might not have a DC connection, but through that person being a part of the DC punk scene or DC culture in general, it has that connection. So it's kind of viewing zines the same way we used to view book collections. Like a famous DC activist, Julius Hobson, we have his book collection, and like the authors, philosophers, and mentors that he chose to collect books from say something about his political viewpoint. And I think it's the same for individuals' full zine collections, which is something that I hope our institution continues doing.
All right. That's wonderful. Thank you all for sharing that. I'm going to move on to the next question unless anybody else has anything to add. What's something that you've done or seen done with zines that you would like to see in other parts of your field, whether it's like specifically libraries and archives or just more broadly?
I think it's less of like a specific activity. I mean, everybody has mentioned some really amazing things that they've done using zines in their spaces. I think for me, it's like the embracing of the culture, right? The like DIY culture of knowledge creation and sharing, that I'd love to see that incorporated a lot more in higher ed, right? Because so often I'm working with students who are assigned essentially the same assignment for every single class, where it's like, research paper, and it's like the exact same thing over and over and over again. But like the reality is that we communicate information in the non-academic world in 80 million different types of ways, and that experimentation of like the format, the method, the kind of like pulling from our life and also from other resources, like that is actually more based in like what the non-academic world looks like, and could be really rich for students in kind of all fields. I resent a message a second ago in the chat talking about like the hard sciences, like science communication is like a really important thing for like, I mean, public health students learning how to communicate science in a really like straightforward way was like at the forefront of the pandemic, right? And so like using something like a zine, or even that like culture of you know, DIY, like creative experimental communication, I think that's like so valuable. So I don't have a specific activities or things. I just think like the spirit of zines.
I would piggyback on that because I've talked about this a little bit, but I too, in the college classroom, am always trying to get students to see themselves as knowledgeable and knowledge producers, and that lived experience is an incredibly valuable source of authoritative knowledge. And so, yeah, I would like to see in the higher ed classroom that culture of appreciating what one knows from lived experience and can translate it into, you know, print culture or digital culture. I think also, I don't know how to say this succinctly or articulately, but like there's a kind of anti-capitalist element to zine making that I would really like to bring into my classrooms. And I think part of that is like an orientation towards collective knowledge production, or like being oriented around towards collectives as opposed to the individual, which like, yes, academics are often progressive and leftist, maybe, but also academia is structured to, you know, only reward individual work and kind of individual, these ideas of individual intelligence and achievement. So I would love to see zines enter academia in a way that shakes up that old-fashioned, outdated, patriarchal, capitalist kind of those norms within academia, and makes space for alternative modes of knowledge production, including collaborative knowledge production, which is maybe more common in the sciences, but in the humanities is still not really happening.
My answer is way simpler. I just, and just as a public librarian, what I would like to see ourselves doing more is just more, especially now that the pandemic is in a different place, not over, but post-vaccine, and people are gathering more, is just to have more gatherings around zines, around zine making, around community. Yeah, just around community.
I agree as well. And Lauren, I am fully in support of bringing and encouraging zine culture within like the academic kind of sphere. I know you mentioned earlier that it can sometimes be difficult to kind of demonstrate the value that zines bring, especially to kind of those hard academics who only adhere to, you know, like the rigors of very specific academic texts, and bringing them like a cut and paste zine maybe doesn't convey the same types of information, even if it's equally or even more valuable. One thing I think I'll add is that I think there are just a lot of different opportunities for academia to improve, not only in the way that it engages students and the different types of learning that are available, but I think that zine making also just makes the learning process more accessible and more inclusive. So instead of students having to focus on making sure that their grammar is absolutely correct, especially if it's not their first language, or not even being familiar or comfortable in a learning environment for a myriad of different reasons, but instead giving them the option to demonstrate that they have in fact learned whatever concepts you're teaching in a way that is less high stakes, but nonetheless valuable and important, I think is another really good way to just examine and start to unpack how inclusive and accessible our learning practices are and could become.
Thank you all so much for those thoughts. I've got one last question for me, and then I want to turn to some of the questions that our audience has asked, either on registration or in the chat. I love seeing this ongoing conversation in the chat happening and the resource sharing. It's really cool to watch. So my last question is, if you had any advice for current librarians, archivists, or educators working with or hoping to work with zines, what would that advice be?
I'll start. Get started, right? So I know sometimes, at least for me, when I start thinking about this grand idea and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger and I get more and more excited, I'm kind of not sure exactly where to start, especially with something as close to my heart and as passionate as I am about zines. I want to make sure that I'm doing it in the correct way. Like I said, I'm honoring the makers. I'm making sure that when it's cataloged correctly so that students can find it. And it can really become overwhelming when you're not exactly sure where to start. So something that's kind of motivated me to get started and start reaching out to folks that have the experience, who have been so warm and so forthcoming with being able to share what they've done and what they've learned, is just really thinking about and centering the end goal, which is a student being able to come into the library, as I mentioned before, seeing something that they can relate to, seeing themselves, their community, their family, and really feeling connected to the college and being able to create that community amongst themselves. So that's really what I've been focusing on when I start to feel a little overwhelmed by, oh my gosh, am I doing this the right way? And also the entire zine community has been, like I said, so warm and receptive. So if you have questions, reach out, because 100% we will be there to help you learn from our mistakes, or we'll be right next to you learning right alongside you.
My answer started a lot like Sharea's, but yeah, like just start. If you're at an institution that is open to zine collecting, then figure out how to what needs to be done in order to make it formalized. If you're at a place that does not allow zine collecting, but you're interested in this, then just start collecting. You will either find another institution to donate to, or you will have a great zine collection. Also, in terms of like the just get started advice, if you start collecting zines, sometimes themes will emerge over time. Don't feel pressure to be like, I'm going to have the most bespoke zine collection on women and anchor. It's like, just start collecting what you like. And after a while, themes really do like clearly emerge over time.
I think also, I'm not an archivist, but opening it up to the community or announcing that you're collecting zines, like when I was starting to create a little baby zine collection for Book Lab, folks came and donated their collections, or like some of their collection that they hadn't looked at in a while or whatever. And so like everyone has been speaking to, there's just such a community culture around zines and zine making that you know, put it out there and folks will come, you know, approach you to help and guide you. I think I also just want to like echo what Shareya said, because especially as an educator, PhD student, like definitely, you know, internalize some of that toxic culture of like, oh, you can't do anything until you're an absolute expert. And I felt like really nervous about starting a zine club or like claiming that I knew anything about zines when it was so new to me. And I think that's like part of what I've totally fallen in love with zine culture for is everyone is new to some aspect of zines and zine making. And it's just not about, you know, prestige or expertness. It's kind of an anti-expert culture, right? And so don't worry that you're going to do it wrong. Just like I think like Sheree said and Lisa said, you know, follow what draws you and enjoy that process, because it is such a love-filled and like emotion-filled and radical and hopeful and angry and all of the things kind of culture. And so just, I think, feel free to like bring your full self to it, is what I would say.
I've been taking notes from everyone else during this section because I definitely feel like I am one of those current librarians looking to work more with zines, and the like reminder that you don't have to be an absolute expert, or even that there isn't necessarily expert is valuable, I think, to me as well. The only thing I would add to this whole list is that finding collaborators can be really helpful, like within your institution, and they don't have to be in glam, right? Like the people who are really championing zines on our campus are coming from women and gender studies and art and our digital culture and design, right? So it's people that I've made friends with who also have a passion for this kind of culture or this kind of creation, right? And so, you know, if like the people within your library are either not knowledgeable or not interested in it, that doesn't necessarily mean that's like the end of it. So you can kind of start out from different starting points, is what I would say.
Thank you all so much for those answers. If there aren't any additional thoughts, I can move into asking some of the audience questions and highlighting some discussion. And I think audience members can also raise their hand if they would like to be unmuted to ask a question audibly as well. So the first question I have, I think, will be interesting for this group, which is, can those in carceral settings produce zines?
Absolutely. I was a prison librarian for 4 years before I started working at Allen Hancock College. And I think that zines in carceral facilities are an absolute natural fit, especially because they don't require any special equipment. And I know for a fact that you can get paper, pens, and scissors in a prison. So yeah, and I think that prisons also are rich with so many different lived experiences. And I think that, you know, one of the things I like to do in my library was to have an open mic. And I think what was so powerful about those programs was that it was a men's prison. So the guys were able to come together, and they really, in those moments, discovered all these things that they had in common with one another outside of their crime or their criminal history. And just seeing them make those connections was such an incredible experience to witness. And so I think zines give incarcerated people the same opportunity to create something and find community amongst themselves in ways that they might not have even known existed. I'll add one more thing. There's a zine called IB64, which is created by an incarcerated person in Florida. I believe it's still ongoing. I think I have like 3 issues of that one as well, but it's called IB64. I'm not sure if there's a mailing address on it, but I can look and see if whoever asked that question is curious. I can connect you with that information.
There are thoughts from our other panelists on this question? I think I can move to somebody has their hand raised. Shannon Scott.
Hey, can you all hear me?
Yes.
Great. So I have never made a zine before, but I would like to do it both for myself and with some of the students I'm teaching right now. If you're going to start making them, what challenges do they have for accessibility, such as being more easily legible for people who are blind or colorblind? And for people who are interested in making theirs, how do we try to, I guess, optimize how accessible they are for people?
Sorry, Lisa, do you want to go ahead?
I was going to say there's a Center for Accessibility at DC Public Library who would, and they would, I'm sure their staff would be happy to weigh in. That is another challenge of zine making. We tried to do a cute little, we did end up doing a run of zines in the archive called Maximum Preservation, about like simple like video, photograph, how to preserve. And our communications department was like, we can't release this because like we can't put the DCPL logo on this and give it our blessing because it's not accessible, because it's not typed out, it's handwritten. Yeah, so there are those barriers, but I know Center for Accessibility has simple tips on just things like color combinations and different things. Yeah, but Lauren, I'll let you go.
I was going to recommend if like legibility or you're concerned about color choice or things like that, that like I make a lot of things digitally and not handwriting. Like you can make a draft handwriting or a draft of, you know, whatever in that way. And then you can use some of the websites that are readily available that will do color checking for you, that will do for, you know, the different visibility stuff. That's how I've approached it in the past. It does limit some of the like creativity, but I think for a good purpose. That's how I've approached it.
I don't really have much to add, but I just wanted to shout out that Violet B. Fox put a great link in the chat of accessibility guide for making zines for visually disabled folks. And I just want to share that I've had students who made digital zines using Canva, Google Slides. Like students can get really creative about what technology works for them, and they made some really great stuff.
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you all for your perspective on that. Okay. How do you navigate, for those of you that take zine donations or work with them, how do you navigate taking zine donations that contain or might contain harmful content, i.e. Racist content and anti-LGBTQ, etc.?
I saw Sharia do a big sigh. Yeah, this has come up in our collecting scope. Yeah, there are just certain pages of group zines that are from, I don't want to call out a certain person, but it was like a fan letter zine, like most of it very vanilla. Like I wrote to the, I'm like trying to say not the name that I'm thinking of, which is why I'm like, what if I say every other name and then that person will be glaring. Anyway, it was a fanzine kind of zine, very low key. Like I wrote to this person, here's what they wrote back. And some of the people wrote back homophobic comments. They use slurs against gay people. And we left it in our collection because it does show us something about the culture. Like it does show something about punk culture that that it's not, you know, we're preservationists. We want to show the full picture of history and of a culture and not pretend like it was all just like pro-queer zines out there and nobody was using slurs back in the 90s. Yeah, so that is how we have dealt with it. For the most part, that does not come up and in our collecting scope, but yeah, it does come up sometimes. That's kind of an example of one of the zines that we wouldn't put online because I doubt that that person writing that letter back to the fan was thinking about the internet when they were doing that, because the internet didn't exist yet, not to excuse any behavior.
Thank you for sharing that example, Lisa. That's something that I've kind of been thinking about as I start my collection here at the college, because libraries are not in the business of censoring material, right? So even if it's something that we don't agree with or that doesn't align with our own personal values, doesn't mean that it's not an important part of history or demonstrates all the different facets and, you know, opinions and views that people have and share. And so I think even if it is uncomfortable or we don't agree with those perspectives, I think it is important to include those things. For me and the collection that I'm beginning at my college, another thing that's come up is appropriateness for the population, particularly because we have minors on campus. So zines that include nudity or pornography. I'm trying to think around, you know, how can or should I include these in the collection, because those types of materials are not permitted on campus in general. So I may kind of rely on campus policy when it comes to dealing with those types of materials as well. But I think it was, as Violet mentioned, having a really solid collection development policy that you can always fall back on and point to when it comes to making collection development choices is going to be a really, really essential tool.
I think another thing that I would say is, like, going along with that, being able to teach about the, as mentioned previously, like oftentimes risky, dangerous kind of forms of communication that happened via zines. I think it's also important that like those can also illustrate that, you know, they were community-led things, and if the community was thinking negative things about some other groups or having these other protests or having, you know, any of these things, that like is part and inherent in like the zine culture, that things are not always going to be like perfect for an academic setting, right? And so I think that lends itself towards teaching about DIY print culture, teaching about you know, like counterculture and things like that. So I think like there's sensitivity, obviously, when it comes to teaching subjects that are difficult to parse with. But that's what you're supposed to do in higher ed, is kind of talk about the difficult things and be a safe enough place to explore different content and kind of try to understand it in a way where you have other people around you theoretically to like walk through the process with you, you know? So I mean, I think those bits, as like uncomfortable as they are still kind of important.
I'd like to add one more thing. As someone who's queer, it's been incredible for me to look at things like the Queer Zine Archive and and see kind of those grassroots movements, but also to see other digital zines online that, use words that now have been reclaimed, or, even the word queer, and just seeing how far we've come in the culture. I mean, it's very moving. I'm incredibly thankful for being alive in this time. And I think that it just really, really, it provides such an incredible perspective for people that do identify with groups that have been underrepresented or pushed down in society in the past. So for those of us who do kind of identify with those groups, to be able to go back and see, like, yes, this zine did include hateful comment, but this was the response to the zine at that time. Like, this is how we spoke out. This is how my community represented itself. And to also see, like, through my 2023 lens, things that were happening in the 70s, and just be like, wow, maybe sometimes it doesn't feel like we have come that far, or we haven't come far enough, but to really look back and see, actually, we've come a really long way. Yes, we still have a ways to go, but just being really, really thankful for being in this time and place now, and being able to acknowledge and see both of those perspectives has been a really, really moving experience, something I'm really, really thankful to have been able to have access to and to have seen.
I'm going to add another, this is kind of outside the realm of themes, but in the realm of archiving and just history keeping and memory keeping. One of the collections at the Library of Congress is the Mattachine Society collection. And the Mattachine Society was a gay rights organization, and they donated a lot of materials to the Library of Congress about gay conversion therapy. So they were very much, like, when I first read the finding aid, I was like, it was donated by who? Like, but they were like, this is messed up and we want it to be recorded. Like, we want it to go down in history that this is happening during this time. So it's just another way to kind of think about it, that, like, painting the most rosy or non-graphic picture is not always going to be accurate. And like you said, it shows how far we've come when you're able to see that progression. Hopefully it shows how far we've come.
Thank you for those answers. I really appreciate hearing the perspective on that. This is an interesting question. Do you see digital zines as a different entity from paper ones? So born digital versus born analog. Thinking about how digital zines may be made for a larger audience, or maybe include web technologies like URLs and links and that sort of thing.
I will start. I know I said I wanted to come back to this, and I'm like, oh no, I don't even know where to start. But one thing that comes to mind is just the sort of similarities and differences in the way that zine culture is networked. If it's digital zines versus print zines. I think that with my students, talking about networked sociality as, like, social media enables, I think my students tend to think that there were no networks before social media, or, like, how did people find each other? And so zines have been a really cool example of how networks can come into being even offline, and that sort of countercultures and minoritized communities can find each other through print culture. So that's one way of thinking about the differences between digital zines and print zines, is like similar and different networked nature. But also I think that with digital zines, I guess as someone who does digital studies, but, like, secretly kind of, hates social media and would love to live in the woods, I love bringing in physical zines to the classroom and having students just take time to like touch them and look through them and spend time and share them with each other. And there's just something that happens. I'm sure this is written about more, fully and articulately, but something that happens when we are in physical space, touching physical objects with each other and not looking at screens. And it changes the dynamic in the classroom. It changes the way people listen and make eye contact with each other. And so that's just one way, especially when I'm usually teaching zines in the context of digital communication technologies. And so I like to bring zines in to kind of sensitize or attune students to the way that the physical object changes our attention and our way of relating to each other.
I love this question and this discussion because this is kind of where the intersection of my collaborators are like kind of coming in, where we're really trying to figure out the question of like tangibility, right? So like the physical object is in and of itself like important, right? That you can't really digitize and replicate a physical object. The born digital, I think it's a different beast. It's like a cousin, I feel like. That's how I have it in my head, where they're definitely related and they're definitely part of the same family, because they have the same roots of the same kind of culture. But the physical nature of something, the digitized nature of something, and the born digital nature of something are completely different in like beautiful ways. And I think that like that's our hope as we start our kind of artist book and zine discussion with students here at our campus, is to kind of explore from the digital culture and design lens, where most of it is born digital, and the artist students who are printmakers, not graphic design majors, but are physically printing things. Where do these things intersect? And I think that like the discussion of how each of those things are inherently their own object and therefore should be treated differently or thought about differently is kind of really interesting. I think I'm with you that I like am not the hugest fan of social media and kind of the over-connected nature of things currently, but it is interesting to think about, even when we move our life digital, we move our life online, there's still a counterculture and there's still, this like DIY nature of things. And I think that those two again are cousins or in the same family, even if they're not exactly the same.
One thing I've noticed with students on my campus is, even though almost all of them are digital natives, they prefer to have a physical textbook. They don't want to read their textbooks online. There still is, I think, some kind of innate desire to have like a physical object, to hold a physical thing in your hands. And I think that Britt spoke to it a little bit earlier, about talking about how, being part of this physical activity can actually be very relaxing. I think it's a really interesting way to engage with material, especially such unique material. I think it just really enhances the overall experience. So I'm really curious to see how students react to the zine workshops that I'm going to be holding in the spring, because I think a lot of them have never heard of zines and are primarily focused on like maintaining their social networks and contributing to kind of the overall culture in that sphere. And I think I am hopeful that because it is a physical only thing, that it will be they'll be curious just enough to want to engage with it, because it's so different and so far out of the realm of the daily swipe left, swipe right, scroll, scroll, scroll. And I think that that's kind of one of the beauties about zines, right? Is that they are they require something of you. It's not a passive activity. You can't passively kind of engage with the zine. You have to be active with it. And I think that that's kind of one of the amazing things about zines. On the other hand, I'm torn, right? Because accessibility is super important, and a lot of things about zines are not accessible to a lot of folks. And so I think in that regard, digital zines actually are important. And so, yeah, I don't think one is necessarily better than the other, but they're both important in very different ways.
I wanted to add something, but Lisa, I thought maybe you wanted to say something? No.
I was going to say the opposite, that I don't have a lot to add to this, but I love absorbing all of this. So go ahead.
Yeah, well, what Shreya was saying reminded me of some other like key differences that I think are really worth thinking about. One of which is so central to what I study, and I forgot about it, but just the way that platforms constrain what we can say and how we can say it and how we communicate with each other. And so I sort of mentioned earlier, like the openness of the medium of a zine, and that there's no, the mediation, like I think, in media studies, we talk about like how the interface or the platform or the medium changes what you can say or constrains what you can say, affords, things that you can say. And with a zine, of course, there's like the paper as the constraint, but otherwise, there's not, what's the word I'm trying to think of, like a publisher or sort of like a human authority that's like preventing what you can say. Of course, if you're a teacher, right, you may be that, if you're bringing it into the classroom, but in general, there's just more, I think, freedom of expression on a zine, which again, I think Lisa was talking about like censorship, and there's like pros and cons to that, right? But that's one thing that like with print, no one is gonna like take your hand and change what you're saying. Whereas the design features online can be rigid about what you can do. And then what was the other thing I just wrote down that I was gonna say? Oh yeah, I've had students talk about how with zines, like there's no like function. So it takes out that like social anxiety of having, sometimes I just like spin out about how young people growing up with social media, like everything they say and do online, people can react to it and express an opinion about what they're doing. And so students have expressed appreciation for how when they're making a print zine, like they get to just really be in themselves, in their heads and bodies, like making this thing, because no one else can just like put right onto it, whether they like it or not, or what their reaction is. And then the third thing was just the temporality of zines. That there's not that same kind of instant gratification, and like related to the last thing, there's not an instant response that can happen visibly. And so and I think this is related to like the joyful process, the calmness of it, right? It is a process of making. And so there's just, you enter a different kind of temporality than when you're engaging with text online.
Thank you for those answers. Such an interesting question. We have another hand raised. Okay, Shannon, do you have a question?
Yeah, I know that this whole conversation was about zines, and I think they're a really good way of bringing together a bunch of diverse opinions and making them more accessible to people. But I also have a question about furthering, I guess, like the goal of zines through other mediums. So, for example, at my university, the department I was in published a graphic novel, and some of us were taught how to make, I guess, choose your own adventure games to help people explore history in a gamified kind of way. So, alongside zines, what do you think would be, I guess, the future of making, I guess, being able to have more accessibility in making information? That's not the way I wanted to word that, but I think you get what I mean. And also making that information more widely accessible.
I'll jump in. I love the question because it reminds me of something I love about zine culture. When I discovered it, was like a sort of side door into what I love about academia without all the pretentiousness, right? That like, it's a low barrier. I love that concept. Kind of, again, like amateur or like unpolished, perhaps as a way of saying it, expression of human culture and knowledge. And so I think another like facet, I'm often was asked to define zines in my various roles of working with them. And I would always say like, there's, you know, there can't really be a definition, because part of the definition of a zine is it's like a book-like object that's doing this kind of thing, or right. And so you could say, like someone was talking about, a pamphlet is like a zine. You could say a social media carousel is like a zine. And I love the idea of like the game is like a zine. And so I think that the concept of zine and the culture of zine opens up all of this possibility for how we can produce and communicate and circulate knowledge. And now I'm kind of forgetting your original question, but what was your question? Sorry.
I think the question was about alternative ways of communicating that are like zines, maybe in digital environments, but just other kinds of creative acts that perform a similar function.
Right. Thank you so much. So yeah, I was just trying to say that I think when you use zines as your object of teaching or like a method of knowledge production, it does allow you to draw in other forms that similarly are kind of like transgressive and afford new possibilities for knowledge production.
I did something that made me feel a little cringy and put an article and video that has me in it in the chat. But it does very much touch on that concept of like maybe any self-published thing could be seen as a zine. So the periodicals that I'm really proud that DC Public Library keeps is one called Blacklight that focuses exclusively on Black gay men in the 70s and 80s, and Women in the Life, which lasted a little longer, but focuses exclusively on queer Black women. But both of them have so many elements that we're talking about in zines, just like the one-page articles, the like personal stories, the notes about like, there's a party happening here on this day. There's just so much overlap with zines and other formats. And I think somebody at some point mentioned like comics and web comics. There's also a ton of overlap, especially with personal storytelling.
While you were talking, I was trying to think about like in academia in general, where are the instances in which you have that collaborative creative creation process or things like that. And I immediately, maybe because library brain, immediately went to like open textbooks when they're created with students, right? Like, and so I think there are aspects that are already in a lot of spaces that that kind of carry some of the culture, the sense of zines, right? Anything in which it is a collaborative or a collective knowledge making moment. You know, there's one professor here who's working with students to write a textbook on conspiracy theories. And so each student group is part of creating and collecting the knowledge that is otherwise at the fringe of a lot of things into this compiled collective thing. And I think you could look at that, you know, that it's like more commonplace than using zines maybe in academia, and you could maybe use that to like do a reverse like psychology thing of like, hey, you're already doing this stuff, you're already like engaged in this community knowledge creation here, you know, what you're doing is kind of like a zine, and like really push people further into the collective and the creative from spaces that feel a little bit more comfy. That's just what I was thinking about.
I love that, Lauren. That is such a great perspective. Yeah, thank you for making that connection. I'm writing that one down. That is so great. Thank you.
I think to kind of follow up with that, I have a question that says, what challenges might educators face when incorporating zines into the curriculum, and how can those challenges be overcome?
I can start. My mind first went to the place of like, well, like who's looking over your shoulder? Just if you're bringing zines into the classroom that are, you know, countercultural or like offensive in some way or risky or whatever, right? I think I have found in the English department, like there's a generalized kind of anxiety about like, am I allowed to do this? And like, no one is actually looking over your shoulder. So I'll just like, or usually they're not, or it depends on your context, right? So I'll put that out there. But then more in terms of like practical matters, I'm just thinking about how when I was teaching zines as a medium, I just had my own little collection that I would bring into class and only had one copy of each thing and couldn't send, I wanted to like send students home with the zines, but I just like couldn't, like was not willing to take that risk. And so that's just like a practical issue of working with zines is I felt like I really had to give a lot of in-class time to let students browse them and read them and experience them. If you have a zine collection at your campus or location, you know, you could assign them or tell them to go spend some time in the library and look at them. And then in terms of like turning the zines in, that was I've been teaching since like students have been turning things online. And so I felt it was higher stakes that I was like carrying around their zines in my backpack, you know, and was just like, oh gosh, like I don't want anything to happen to them. So those are just some like practical matters, but I haven't encountered any huge challenges. I think as with all things teaching, like teaching how to do the zine fold kind of in the classroom took longer than I anticipated, right? I think, and for me, because I want the zine making experience to be joyful, I really felt like I didn't want to rush it. And so I would say just give more time than you think you should, so that it can be a space of like joy and exploration.
From my perspective as a like non-disciplinary faculty, right, working in the library, I'm an outreach librarian. So everything I do is a part of like convincing other people to use us as resources or to come to the library or to invite us into classes. So in terms of like working as a librarian, trying to convince other people to use a zine library or to engage with those kinds of things, I kind of always go back to like what I think is the core of doing outreach, which is connection building, relationship building, community building. I know that, I mean, I've only been at my institution for about 1.5 years at this point, but everything I've been able to accomplish has happened because I just started talking to people and making like one-on-one connections with people. And then once you do that, you then have like library champions, right? And you'll eventually get zine champions on campus. You know, it might be 1 or 2 professors at a time, right? You'll get a Brit who involves all of the zines and all of the things. And then Britt will talk to all of their colleagues about the work they're doing, and that will like spread slowly. And so sometimes it takes time, which is the most frustrating part of it, is that you are so excited and invested in what you want to do. And you already know the value of what you're trying to offer to people. But unfortunately, when it comes to library worlds, you're gonna get your immediate buy-in champion people, and everybody else, it's going to take some word of mouth. It's going to take some time. It's going to take seeing you really frequently or hearing you talk about zines like 10 times before they go, well, maybe I should check out the zine thing. Lauren hasn't shut up about it, right? And so that's kind of my perspective coming from the non-disciplinary faculty, where I have to like beg to teach the things I want to teach, is just start building relationships with people who will listen.
I think that's really great advice for any institutional change. And like as a public librarian, I feel like sometimes an easier hill to climb on certain things, because I can say like, we value general interest users as much as the fancy authors who are writing books using our stuff and are going to cite us. So it's just knowing what your institution values. Like my institution really values people who come to the building in order to use our collections. So it's figuring out how to collect, like how to communicate, like our goals are actually the same. Like zines are popular, I can show you how, and here's how it meets this thing that you're thinking about. Like how I started in the beginning talking about like, we collect zines because it connects to our mission statement of collecting on the hyperlocal. So it's just, you want to kind of do that work for people, of making the connection between what they value and what you value, and showing them the connection there. This is becoming a really exciting answer about managing up instead of about zines. So I'm gonna leave it there.
No, it's such a good point, and it reminds me of what Sharia was saying before about zines being a really accessible, like pedagogical tool. And so I think most universities at least pay lip service to valuing accessibility and diversity. And so you can easily make an argument that is true that incorporating zines in your pedagogy is a way to include diverse learners and use multimodal kind of assignment designs to allow diverse learners to demonstrate their knowledge and engage with the material, which is true. And so that's great.
I agree. I think that making those connections with individuals within certain departments is really helpful. And even just like Lauren was saying, spreading the words about what zines are. And then also even sharing like, hey, you're in psychology. We have zines about all of these different things within psychology, or, you know, you're in sociology or you're in queer studies. We have zines specifically for your field, is another really great way to kind of get those hooks in, to say, oh, you know, not only did I not know what zines are, but I didn't know that they were firsthand accounts of people in the 70s who are doing these gay pride marches. You know, and so it's like really just making those connections with people. And then, you know, like Lisa was saying, to demonstrate like, this is how the subject directly relates to you, and this is why you should be involved and become invested in what we're doing.
Mason, if there aren't any questions, can I do one last plug for an event?
Sure. Yeah, I was gonna see if I could kind of throw it to y'all.
Yeah.
Have you ask questions of each other a little bit? So.
I was just going to say DC Zine Fest is happening on the 18th at MLK Library. It's on the 5th floor, but the archive is on the 4th floor. So if you go to Zine Fest, please come visit us. There's a big exhibit in the middle of the 4th floor that also I love using zines as like a gateway to the maybe less exciting archival materials, but we have a lot of exhibits in the middle of the 4th floor, and then the public space where you can go see those resources.
Yeah, so I wanted to see if I could maybe throw it back to y'all a little bit and see if you have questions for each other before we wrap up here in just a few minutes.
I just want to express thanks for not only the panelists, but everyone that came and put in all those different links in the chat. I've been clicking them all and leaving them open so I can go back and revisit them. I think that just really speaks to kind of the ethos of anything zine related, right? Is we want to share information and create community, even if it's just for 2 hours on Zoom. So yeah, I feel like I've learned a lot, and I'm just really appreciative to have been invited and to meet my fellow panelists, and really thankful for all the information that was shared by folks that put it in the chat. So thank you so much for letting me be here with you all today.
Ditto. I just want to say, I don't have a question, but I just want to express my enthusiasm for, and just sort of like awe at how culture works, like how zines can hold this kind of space that invites a different way of relating to each other than is like dominant in American culture, I think. And this is like what drew me to them so powerfully as I was a PhD student, feeling so much pressure and imposter syndrome and like all the stuff. And zines were just this like happy, radical, passionate, you know, messy object that invite space for people to feel and rant and question and express and, you know, together. And so it's cool how like even in a space where we're having this kind of formal conversation, you can just feel that energy. And that's neat. So thanks everybody for doing this.
That's all I had as well. And thanks to Mason for doing all the legwork on organizing all of us.
All right. Well, I want to just thank our panelists for coming and sharing your knowledge and your experience. We had a good turnout and lots of questions and resource sharing, and this is the kind of stuff that gets me excited. I love to see this, and it's just been such a good experience learning from all of you and seeing the knowledge sharing happen in real time from the attendees and from the panelists. This has been excellent. So I want to thank you all for your time and for participating in this as well. With that, I think we can close up. We have just to remind everyone, Cafe, the Center for Archival Futures, has a regular monthly talks and also off-cycle talks like this during the semester. So if you're interested in continuing learning about different kinds of broadly conceived archival issues and questions, the events that we host are very interesting and thought-provoking, and continue to share knowledge from across the academic and practitioner side of the field. I want to thank everybody again for coming out, and I want to thank the 4 panelists for their time.